The Apostle Peter wrote a letter to a group of struggling, exhausted Christians and gave them a terrifying warning. He told them to be sober, to be vigilant, because their adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. It is an image of absolute dread, the apex predator, the shadow in the tall grass, a picture of pure, malicious consumption. But decades later, the Apostle John is exiled on the island of Patmos. He is given a vision of the throne room of heaven, and he begins to weep. He weeps because no one in heaven or on earth is worthy to open the scroll that holds the destiny of creation. Then, an elder steps forward and tells John to stop crying. He points to the center of the throne and says, "Do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has prevailed." Jesus is the Lion. This is the central tension of the image. In the New Testament, the exact same animal is used to describe the ultimate enemy of God and the Son of God. It sounds contradictory, a single creature standing for chaos and redemption, for the one who shatters the world and the one who puts it back together. Most modern readers assume this is just a coincidence of ancient vocabulary. They assume biblical writers simply used whatever fierce animal came to mind. Peter used the lion to mean danger. John used the lion to mean victory. A simple metaphor, easily explained, and quickly moved past. But biblical authors do not use imagery by accident. When an image repeats across the Hebrew and Greek text, it is not a random literary device. It is a deliberate, carefully woven pattern. And the lion is one of the most complex, deeply layered patterns in all of Scripture. Modern readers often strip the danger out of the biblical text. We turn the lion into a safe, majestic emblem on a church banner. We forget that to the original audience, the lion was not a majestic idea. It was a terrifying reality. It was the sound that made blood run cold in the middle of the night. The word and the image appear more than 150 times. The lion stalks through the early wilderness narratives. It roars from the pages of the prophets. It decorates the golden steps of King Solomon's throne. It paces in the dark of Babylonian execution pits. And it stands in the holy center of the book of Revelation. If we only read the lion as a generic symbol for strength, we flatten the text. We miss the slow, precise work the biblical authors are doing. They are taking a literal, physical nightmare and using it to explain the deepest realities of spiritual warfare, divine justice, and royal authority. The image of the lion is always about sovereignty. It is always about rule. But the question the Bible constantly asks is, whose rule? And what kind of sovereignty? Is it the power that consumes the vulnerable, or the power that protects them? Does the lion come to devour the sheep, or does the lion come to save them? To understand how this single creature can hold two completely opposite meanings, we cannot start at the end of the story. We cannot begin in the throne room of heaven. We have to go back to the ancient Near East, to the dust and the heat, and see what a lion actually meant to an ancient shepherd standing alone in the dark. To understand the biblical lion, we must first forget the zoo. We must forget the distant, sleepy cats of modern wildlife documentaries. In the ancient Near East, the lion was not a majestic idea. It was a neighbor. The Asiatic lion roamed the forests of Lebanon, the thickets of the Jordan River, and the arid hills of Judah. They were thick, powerful predators. For an ancient shepherd sleeping on the ground, the lion was the ultimate embodiment of chaos. It was the wild, untamed danger that waited just beyond the light of the campfire. In the biblical imagination, the wilderness is always the place of testing. It is the realm where human control stops and vulnerability begins. And the lion was the undisputed king of that realm. This physical reality is exactly why the story of David is introduced the way it is. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, long before David ever faces a giant, he tells King Saul his resume. He explains that when he was keeping his father's sheep, a lion came and took a lamb from the flock. David went after it. He struck it, and when the beast turned on him, David caught it by the beard and killed it. That detail is not a random piece of trivia. It is not just a young man bragging about his bravery. In the ancient world, Kings were constantly depicted as shepherds, and their primary duty was to protect the flock from predators. By defeating the lion, David was proving he had the true heart of a sovereign. He was willing to step into the chaos, risk his own life, and push the danger back. He was the good shepherd. We see this same testing pattern earlier in the book of Judges. In chapter 14, Samson is walking toward Timnah when a young, roaring lion rushes at him. The Spirit of the Lord comes powerfully upon Samson, and he tears the beast apart with his bare hands. Again, this is not just an action sequence. It establishes the lion as the ultimate gauge of strength. If you want to know if God is empowering a leader, watch what happens when they meet the apex predator. Later, Samson finds honey inside the carcass of that same lion. Out of the ultimate eater came something sweet. Out of death came life. This subtle reversal begins to hint that the lion's power can be overturned. But for centuries, this remained the baseline understanding of the creature. It was the beast of the wilderness. It represented the fragile nature of human life. It was the sudden, violent end that could come for anyone who wandered too far from the safety of the community. Not a metaphor, a memory. Not a poetic device, a physical threat. Not an abstraction, a nightmare with teeth. The biblical writers use this deeply ingrained cultural fear as their canvas. Every time a lion appears in these early historical accounts, it serves as a boundary marker. It reminds the reader that the world is broken, dangerous, and desperately in need of a protector. But as the history of Israel moves forward, the context begins to change. The nation grows. They build heavily walled cities. They clear the forests for agriculture. The physical threat of the wild beast slowly begins to fade from daily, ordinary life. Yet, the biblical authors do not retire the image. Instead of letting the lion fade into the history of the wilderness, the prophets of Israel pick it up. They realize that the terror of the lion is the perfect vocabulary for something much larger. They take the fear of the dark thicket, and they bring it right into the paved streets of Jerusalem. The lion was the ultimate symbol of human vulnerability. But as the biblical story progresses, the prophets begin to take this literal nightmare and turn it into something even more terrifying. In the 8th century BC, a shepherd named Amos walks out of the southern hills and into the wealthy, comfortable cities of the north. The nation of Israel is prosperous. The markets are full. The walls are strong. The physical danger of the wilderness feels very far away. But Amos brings the wilderness with him. He begins his message by asking the people a series of rhetorical questions. In Amos chapter 3, verse 4, he asks, "Does a lion roar in the forest when he has no prey? Does a young lion cry out from his den if he has caught nothing?" To a modern reader, a roaring lion sounds like a warning. It sounds like an animal announcing its presence before it strikes. But to an ancient shepherd like Amos, the roar means something entirely different. A lion hunting in the tall grass is completely silent. It stalks in the shadows. It only roars after the ambush is complete. The roar is the sound a lion makes when its jaws are already closing around the prey. The roar means it is too late to run. Amos connects this horrifying reality to the voice of God. In verse 8 he says, "A lion has roared. Who will not fear? The Lord God has spoken. Who can but prophesy?" Notice what just happened. The pattern has shifted. The lion is no longer just a physical animal roaming the Jordan Valley. It is no longer just a chaotic force of nature that a good king is supposed to fight. Now, God himself is the lion. This is a shocking reversal for the people of Israel. They believed God was their shepherd. They believed he was the one who protected the flock from the predator. But Amos, and later the prophet Hosea, introduce a terrifying theological truth. When the flock begins to act like a pack of wolves, the shepherd becomes the lion. The nation had become corrupt. The wealthy were crushing the poor. The courts were trading justice for silver. The covenant was completely broken. And so, the prophets warn that God is about to break into their comfortable reality with the devastating force of an apex predator. In Hosea chapter 5, verse 14, God speaks directly to the divided nation. He says, "For I will be like a lion to Ephraim, and like a young lion to the house of Judah. I, even I, will tear them and go away. I will take them away, and no one shall rescue. This is the roar of divine judgment. It is not uncontrolled anger. It is holy consequence, not a random attack, a deliberate dismantling of a corrupt system. The prophets weaponize the cultural fear of the lion to show that God's justice cannot be escaped, bought off, or negotiated with. When the holy weight of God moves against injustice, it is as terrifying and unavoidable as a lion in the thicket. Israel had forgotten the fear of the Lord, so the prophets reminded them of the fear of the wilderness. But the pattern does not stop there. The prophets showed that God's justice could be as terrifying as a lion. But soon, the people of Israel would find themselves dragged into exile, trapped in a foreign cage with a very different kind of beast. When the judgment the prophets warned about finally arrived, it did not come as a storm, it came as an empire. In Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 7, the prophet issues a terrifying warning about the coming Babylonian invasion. He says, "The lion has come up from his thicket, and the destroyer of nations is on his way." The empire of Babylon did not just destroy cities, it consumed them, and they wanted everyone to know it. This was not just poetic language, it was political reality. If you walked the processional way in ancient Babylon, approaching the massive Ishtar Gate, you were surrounded by walls of blue glazed brick, and pacing along those walls were hundreds of life-sized golden lions. They were sculpted with their mouths open, teeth bared, marching alongside the travelers. Babylon had adopted the lion as its royal emblem. It was state propaganda. To a Jewish exile being dragged into the city, the message was unmistakable. The thicket had won. The beast had taken the throne. This is why the story of Daniel in the lion's den in Daniel chapter 6 is so profound. It is not just a Sunday school story about a brave man and some sleepy animals. It is a story about a clash of sovereignties. The Persian Empire, which conquered Babylon, used the literal lion as a tool of state execution. The pit was a physical manifestation of their authority. By throwing Daniel into the pit, the empire was making a theological claim. They were saying they held the ultimate power of life and death. When the king sealed the stone over the den, it was meant to be the final word. But when the morning comes, the lions are quiet. Daniel is alive. The message is brilliant and subversive. The God of Israel walks into the execution chamber of the greatest empire on earth, puts his hand on the mouth of their ultimate weapon, and tells it to sit down. He shows the empire that their symbol of absolute power actually answers to a higher throne. Yet, the connection between empires and lions continues to deepen. In Daniel chapter 7, Daniel has a vision of 4 terrifying beasts rising from the sea. These beasts represent the violent, oppressive empires of human history. And what does the first beast look like? It is like a lion, and it has eagle's wings. The pattern has evolved again. First, the lion was the danger of the physical wilderness. Then, it became the roar of divine judgment. Now, it is the symbol of beastly human power. It is a picture of any nation that rules by teeth and claws. The biblical text is making a stunning critique of human power. When humanity refuses to rule the world under the wisdom of God, we do not become gods, we become animals. We become the very predators we were supposed to protect the garden from. By the time we reach the end of the Old Testament, the image of the lion is deeply associated with fear, exile, and the crushing weight of foreign armies. The people of God are scattered, and the lions of the earth are ruling over them. It seems like the predators have won. Babylon and its successors used the lion to project absolute authority. But long before Babylon existed, a quiet prophecy in the book of Genesis had already claimed the lion for a completely different kingdom. When we finally reach the New Testament, the pattern of the lion has absorbed centuries of historical trauma. It holds the ancient memory of the wilderness. It holds the terrifying weight of divine judgment. It holds the crushing, golden oppression of Babylon. All of these layers merge into one massive spiritual reality. And this brings us right back to where we started, to the letter of 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Peter warns the early Christians that their adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Peter does not use this image because it is generic. He uses it because he knows the entire biblical history of the creature. The spiritual enemy of humanity is not a creator. He is a consumer. He is the ultimate empire. He is the ultimate thicket. He represents the chaotic, devouring force that wants to tear the order of God apart. When Peter says the devil is roaring, we have to remember the shepherd Amos. The roar does not mean the lion is far away, merely issuing a warning. The roar means the ambush is complete. The jaws are closing. The psalmist understood this perfectly. In Psalm 22, a song that Jesus himself would later quote while hanging on the cross, the sufferer cries out in absolute agony. Surrounded by mockers and executioners, the writer pleads with God, "Save me from the lion's mouth." At this point in the biblical story, the lion is no longer just an animal. It is the shape of death itself. It is the spiritual force of darkness that seeks to dismantle the human soul. Every time a biblical writer wants to describe a power that consumes the innocent, they point to the lion. Pause for a second and see what has emerged. So far, this has not been a random set of details. The physical threat became a prophetic warning. The prophetic warning became a political reality, and the political reality became a cosmic adversary. The pattern is deliberate, devastating, and incredibly consistent. But this raises a massive theological problem. If the lion represents the ultimate spiritual enemy, if it is the symbol of Babylon, the shadow of death, and the very face of the devil, how can the Bible possibly justify using that exact same image for the Messiah? How can Jesus be the lion, if the lion is the devourer? To answer that, we have to realize that the dark side of the pattern is only half of the story. While the prophets and kings were dealing with the threat of the predator, there was a second, parallel pattern running underneath the entire history of Israel. It is a quiet, steady promise that completely flips the meaning of the beast. It takes the teeth, the claws, and the sovereignty of the lion, and it assigns them to someone who will use that power to heal the world instead of tearing it apart. And to find where that second pattern begins, we have to go all the way back to the book of Genesis, to a dusty tent in Egypt, and the final, fading words of a dying father named Jacob. The book of Genesis ends with a family living in a foreign land. They are settled in Egypt, far from the borders God originally promised them. The patriarch Jacob is old, his strength is failing, and he knows his death is near. So he gathers his 12 sons around his bed to speak a final, prophetic word over each of them. These words will define the future of the 12 tribes of Israel. When Jacob turns to his fourth son, Judah, he does not speak about agriculture. He does not speak about borders. He speaks about a beast. In Genesis chapter 49, verse 9, Jacob says, "Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up." He bows down. He lies down as a lion. And as a lion, who shall rouse him? This is the exact moment the biblical pattern splits. Up until this point in the ancient world, the lion was almost exclusively a symbol of chaotic wilderness danger. It was the predator in the dark. But Jacob takes the ultimate image of fear and anchors it to a promise of royalty. Notice the careful progression in his words. Judah begins as a cub. He grows into a hunting lion, going up from the prey. But then, the image settles into something completely unique. He lies down as a lion. To a modern reader, a resting lion might seem inactive. It might seem like the action is over. But to an ancient mind, a resting lion was the ultimate picture of absolute, uncontested sovereignty. A predator only rests out in the open when it knows it has no rivals. It lies down when all enemies have been entirely defeated and the territory is secure. Jacob asks, "Who shall rouse him?" The assumed answer is no one. No one dares to wake the king. Jacob is describing a future ruler whose power is so absolute that he brings total, unbroken peace. The very next verse makes the political reality explicit. Verse 10 says, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs. And to him shall be the obedience of the people." The scepter is the staff of a king. The lion is no longer just an animal in the thicket. It is the official, prophetic emblem of the royal line of God's people. God is taking the symbol of the devourer, the symbol that human empires like Babylon would later use to crush the vulnerable, and he is assigning it to a king who will rule with perfect justice. This single prophecy carved itself into the heart of the nation. Generations passed. The kingdom of Israel fractured. The Babylonians destroyed the temple. The Romans eventually occupied the paved streets of Jerusalem. Through centuries of trauma and oppression, the Jewish people held tightly to the ancient words of Jacob. They were waiting for the Lion of Judah. They expected a massive, military conqueror. They expected a king with teeth and claws who would rise up, shed the blood of the oppressors, and establish a violent, earthly throne. They wanted a predator of their own, to fight the predators of the world. They wanted the roar of divine judgment to shatter the empire of Rome. For centuries, Israel waited for this conquering beast to arrive and tear their enemies apart. The expectation was built entirely on raw, uncompromising power. But when John the Revelator finally stands in the throne room of heaven and looks for the Lion of Judah, what he actually sees changes the entire biblical story. John is standing in the very center of the cosmos. He is in the throne room of heaven, recorded in Revelation chapter 5, and he is weeping bitterly because the scroll of human history is sealed and no one is worthy to open it. Then, one of the elders speaks to him. He says, "Do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed." Imagine the weight of that moment. John is a Jewish man living in exile under the crushing weight of the Roman Empire. He knows the ancient prophecy of Jacob. He knows the history of the wilderness. He knows exactly what a lion represents. When the elder announces the Lion of Judah, John expects to see a predator. He expects the beast of the thicket. He expects the terrifying roar of divine judgment that the prophet Amos spoke about. He expects a violent, unconquerable king who will finally march out and tear the oppressive empires of the earth to pieces. John turns to look at the center of the throne, but he does not see teeth. He does not see claws. In verse 6, John writes what he actually sees. He says, "I looked, and behold, in the midst of the throne stood a lamb, as though it had been slain." This is the most profound visual paradox in all of Scripture. The elder announces a lion, but when John looks, he sees a slaughtered lamb. Many readers rush past this tension. They assume Jesus simply has two different modes. They think he is a gentle lamb when he forgives, and a violent lion when he judges. But that flattens the genius of the vision. John is not describing two different moments in time. He is not saying Jesus is a lamb today and a lion tomorrow. The vision of the lamb is the definition of the lion. The elder tells John what the true king is called. But the vision shows John how the true king actually conquers. This is the great reversal of the entire biblical pattern. God takes the ultimate symbol of apex, predatory power, and he completely redefines what true sovereignty looks like. How does the Lion of Judah win the cosmic battle? Not by shedding the blood of his enemies. By shedding his own blood. He does not conquer by devouring the weak. He conquers by becoming weak, standing in the place of the vulnerable, and letting the jaws of death close around him. This changes how we understand the entire pattern that came before it. When Samson tore the wilderness lion apart and found honey inside its carcass, it was a quiet whisper of this exact moment. Out of the eater came something sweet. Out of the ultimate symbol of death came the unexpected sweetness of resurrection life. When Daniel stood in the Babylonian execution pit, the silent lions were pointing forward to this true king. A king who would willingly descend into the ultimate pit of the grave, face the devouring spiritual adversary that Peter warned about, and silence its power from the inside out. The power of God is not like the power of human empires. Babylon and Rome used violence to maintain control. They ruled by threatening to consume anyone who stood in their way. But the throne of heaven operates on a completely different frequency. The ultimate power in the universe is not predatory. It is sacrificial. The highest expression of authority is not taking life, but giving it freely. The image was never just about raw power. It was pointing to a completely different kind of kingship. Let's look back at the ground we have covered. If we only read the Bible as a collection of random verses, we miss the grand architecture of the text. We see a lion here, we see a lion there, and we assume it is just poetic decoration. We assume the biblical writers were simply grabbing whatever fierce animal came to mind. That sounds like a small misunderstanding. It is not. It flattens a deliberate, brilliant theology of power. The pattern started in the dust of the ancient Near East. The lion was the ultimate threat to human life. It was the chaos of the wilderness, waiting in the dark thicket. It was the sound that made a shepherd's blood run cold. Then, the prophets took that exact fear and turned it toward a corrupt nation. The lion became the inescapable roar of divine justice. God used the image of the predator to show that his holy standard could not be mocked or outrun. Then, human empires hijacked the image for themselves. Babylon and Rome used the lion to say they held the ultimate power of life and death. They claimed to be the apex predators of the earth, ruling by teeth and claws. And finally, the New Testament revealed the dark, spiritual reality behind those empires. The ultimate predator is not a human nation. It is a cosmic adversary, prowling in the unseen shadows, seeking to devour the human soul. If the biblical story ended there, it would be an absolute tragedy. It would mean the universe is fundamentally violent. It would mean the world is ruled by whoever has the sharpest teeth. It would mean the thicket always wins. But underneath all that historical trauma, the book of Genesis had already planted a quiet promise. A promise that a true king would come from the tribe of Judah. A king who would hold the absolute, uncontested sovereignty of the lion, but refuse to use it the way Babylon did. When that king finally arrives in the book of Revelation, he does the unthinkable. He steps into the arena with the devouring lion of death. He faces the ultimate adversary, and he wins. But he does not win by becoming a larger, more violent predator. He wins by becoming a slaughtered lamb. He takes the violence, the judgment, and the devouring power of the world onto himself, and he completely exhausts it. He breaks the power of the eater by allowing himself to be consumed. He conquers the terror of the wilderness by descending completely into it. And because of that perfect sacrifice, his rule is absolute. He is the Lion of Judah. He sits on the throne of the cosmos. He is not pacing. He is not anxious. As the ancient prophecy promised, he lies down as a lion, and no enemy in heaven or on earth dares to wake him. His territory is secure forever. This changes how we read every page of the story. It changes how we understand the very nature of God. The true king of the universe does not rule through fear. He does not rule by crushing the vulnerable. He rules through self-giving love. If this journey has helped you see the brilliant, careful design of Scripture with fresh eyes, consider subscribing so you do not miss the next deep dive into the biblical text. Because the next time you see a lion in the text, you will not just see an animal. The image was never just about a predator in the tall grass. It was the quiet, deliberate shadow of a king who conquered the wilderness by giving his life for the sheep.